High interest rates and inflation have put pressures on economies throughout the world. With many currencies weakening against the US dollar, it has raised the cost of imports and lending. But there could be a silver lining for tourists in countries. Junwei Sum has this.
In the 80s, prices in Japan were sky high, but not anymore.
Everyone I know has come to Japan because the dollar is so much stronger than the yen right now. Even my Japanese friends that come to Hawaii come over and tell me how much a Diet Coke is in Japan. And I was like, what? That's it? It's like a night and day difference.
1,000 yen is like $7, I think, something like that. So it makes everything seem a lot cheaper.
Tourists from the US and elsewhere are flocking to Japan, brought in at least partly by the strong dollar and weak yen. Their buying power led to visitor spending topping pre-pandemic levels in September. The number of foreign visitor arrivals to Japan also jumped beyond 2019 levels for the first time in October. Other countries where a falling currency has lured tourists include Turkey and Argentina. Foreign tourist arrivals to Turkey were up by more than 12% in the first 9 months of the year, from the same period in 2022. Argentina's tumbling peso, while bad for locals, is attracting visitors holding US dollars. The demand for greenbacks is so high that there are currently 12 different official and unofficial exchange rates. Trying not to confuse tourists, the government even introduced a tourist-only preferential exchange rate. That higher rate applies to visitors using credit and debit cards, an example of just how important tourism can be to an economy that needs hard cash. Junwei Sum, CGTN.
For more about the world of travel, exchange rates, and everything else when it comes to vacationing, the exchange rate, the Americans packing over the Acropolis in Athens despite the soaring heat, revenge travel fueled by the pandemic savings, has caused a lot of people to rethink where they might go. With us to talk about the exchange rates and how it might have an impact on tourism, at least destinations, is Lee Abbamonte. He's traveled to every country, or almost every country, I assume, in the world, including the North and the South. So a bit of an expert, if you will. You know, I don't know if money is necessarily a factor, but for the rest of us, we always think about, hey, we're gonna travel from A to B, and we're gonna bring this amount of money, and these are the exchange rates. I imagine that there's definitely an impact when one place is significantly less than another.
Yeah, it is every country, by the way. And yeah, of course, money always plays a factor in where you go. I mean, just on the last segment, they talked about Japan. I was in Japan a couple months ago. And if you'd ever been to Japan before, it was so much cheaper than it normally is. It was like a gift. And places like Argentina, places like Mexico, where the exchange rate can fluctuate a lot, makes a big difference in how much things cost and obviously how much you spend and what you're willing to step up and spend more to achieve.
The destinations that, not necessarily that you choose, but I think for a lot of other tourists, these countries know that their currency is generally, I guess, on the weaker side. Mm-hmm. So they probably want to target the folks that have a stronger currency. I guess, does that make sense? And if I was interested in making my travel budget stretch farther, I would seek out these deals, would you not?
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I mean, developing nations that have poor currencies, you know, places like Argentina or like Zimbabwe or South Africa, they're always going to be targeting the euro, the pound, the dollar, obviously, and trying to attract those visitors because those are the people with, you know, powerful currencies, and they're looking to spend, and they're going on vacation, so they're willing to spend more than they normally would at home. So that's how that can make such a profound impact on the economies in these kind of less developed countries, or at least ones with poor currencies.
The reverse is likely also true, because what's a good deal for you is equally a bad deal for them if they're coming to visit you, whether you're in Hawaii or LA or New York, right?
Yeah, of course. And you hear that all the time when you go to, places that unfortunately have a poor currency. If you talk to an Argentinian, if they come to the US, they're just like, my God, everything's so expensive and this and that. Meanwhile, if you go there, it's just like glorious, right? So it just really depends how you look at it. But they are happy to take your dollars. And a lot of them, at least the ones with the foresight, keep their money in dollars or in euros as opposed to, say, the Argentinian currency or something equivalent to that.
I'm just curious, what caused you to want to visit we always say we want to see the world. You actually saw the world. What led you to do this?
It was just a hobby. I just enjoyed traveling, and it was something I just started doing. I did a study abroad in college and just kind of went from there. And then at some point, I found out there was actually a record to be the youngest person to ever do it. So I just kind of took inventory of time and money and decided to do it. And that was really all it was.
And in terms of travel tips, I imagine you've been to some interesting countries, if you will, that just carrying a bunch of dollars is not necessarily going to get you out of trouble. How did you prepare yourself for going to countries that we rarely talk about on television?
Well, yeah, I have for sure been to places like that, places like North Korea or Afghanistan or Libya or Iraq, Iran, places like that. And, you just do your research ahead of time. And a lot of them actually welcome dollars. So I always have dollars on me in places like that. And I always have euros as well, kind of as a backup. And cash is king in places like that. They don't necessarily take credit cards, so you really do need cash. A lot of people don't think about that, but as I always say, in the developing world, cash is king because you never know what's going to happen. And in places like that, you might get yourself in a situation you don't necessarily want to be in, and you might need a little cash on hand to get out of it.
I imagine you travel light, given the amount of traveling that you do.
Yeah.
But aside from carrying some cash and maybe an emergency credit card or two, you're probably on the internet. What did you do for your living and food? I imagine you're meeting people as well, but it's expensive to live day to day, not to mention potential medical issues that might come up.
Oh yeah, I mean, in my former life, I was a banker and then worked on Wall Street for several years and am an entrepreneur and have sold a couple businesses. And other than that, yeah, I mean, you do the best you can to stay healthy. Always have travel insurance, always, and just again, do your research and be smart. Common sense goes a long way, especially in the developing world. Don't go where you're not supposed to go. And if you are in a country like we were just talking about before, always take the proper precautions. And again, just know what you're doing ahead of time. Don't go out after dark or places you're not supposed to be, because believe me, in those places there's nothing worth going out for at night anyway.
What's that? We're focused on exchange rates, but I've often found myself when traveling, you never seem to have enough dollars or money to do the things that you want. Tell me about a situation that you ran into and you kind of had to find a way to resolve it, but it didn't necessarily have to do with money.
Well, I was in the country of Liberia, which is in West Africa, and I was with a friend of mine, and we were traveling overland across West Africa for about 2.5 months, and I had what I thought was an adequate amount of cash, and let's just say we ran out and needed cash. There was no ATMs in the entire country, and it was the middle of the night back home, so we couldn't exactly call someone to Western Union. So basically made a deal with an airline, the only airline in the country that operated internationally, which was Brussels Airlines at the time, and basically paid $2,000 over what a plane ticket would be just to be able to get them to give me cash, and of course a premium on top of that. But you got to get creative sometimes when you're in places like this,